We all know that communication skills are crucial for any relationship. And when somebody has those skills, oh my gosh, they make so much of an impression to you and to me. But we've also had those moments where we're really nervous to talk with people because we don't know how our request or our message will be received. Well, this podcast, fortunately, is going to go over all the things, the science, the tips, the tricks, and the ways to make sure that you can have the best relationships that you can through the way that you communicate. And after listening to these episodes, you can do so fearlessly with confidence, knowing that you can be relatable to anybody you choose. Welcome to the Attractive Relationships Podcast. So in this video, we are going to discuss first impressions and lasting impressions, because there's been a recent development, at least mainstream recent development, about what it really means to make a great first impression. Does it really even matter? More importantly, how do we make sure we make a lasting impression? And when we talk about this topic, I think it's going to help a lot of us overcome fears of meeting new people or talking with people in general. Because I'll tell you the truth right now, that your first impressions, while not unimportant, your first impressions are most likely not going to be your lasting impressions. And now this isn't just based off of my own experience or my own wisdom. This is something that a lot of psychologists and a lot of other people who are very intelligent are starting to catch on. And I really believe that this started to take a massive impact when Chris Voss, who is the author of Never Split the Difference, started to write about it in his book. And he teaches this quite a bit, that it's not about your first impressions. He says you can mess up first impressions all day long and still be liked, because it is the last impression that is the lasting impression. That's how he coins it. And similarly, now let me back up a little bit. Chris Voss, if you don't know who he is, he's a former FBI hostage negotiator. So he had to be really good at communicating and using his words to be able to quickly connect with people to get hostages out of the kidnappers' hands. All right. Andrew Bustamante, who is also becoming very popular, he runs a company called Everyday Spy, and you can follow him on YouTube and get some great advice from him also. And he mentions something similar about it's the last impression, that's the lasting impression. They say it slightly differently, but like it's the same message. And so why would a former CIA operative and a former FBI negotiator really feel so passionate about that? And the reason they do is because in their line of work of really connecting and relating with people to get things that they were needing or wanting, these are skills that they were taught and that they actually practiced in high stakes situations. Now, what does that mean for you and I if we were to take these principles and apply it for us? Because for us, most interactions on a day-to-day basis may not necessarily be high stakes, like you need to grab hostages away from somebody who's armed, or you need to grab secrets from somebody in another country. However, we do have negotiations when we're in sales and we're meeting somebody in sales or for a client for the first time, or we're going on a date for the first time, or maybe you got that new job and you are going to some work function where you're going to meet people for the first time. I mean, let's be real. Anytime you are interacting with people, the first time you speak through that interaction is a first impression of sorts. But we get most nervous when it's our very first time. So how is it comforting to you and I to know that it's not about your first impression that will make or break what the other person leaves away thinking about? Well, it's comforting to know, because really the first impressions is all about just not scaring the person. If you've listened to some of the other videos, and this is by another researcher, Vanessa Van Edwards, Andrew Bustamante also talks about this a bit, that when we are first meeting somebody, our primal instincts are just to know, are you safe for me to be around? Do I like you? And do you like me? All right. Those are the questions we're trying to answer. And if we can at least answer that we are not threatening and that we are likable, we've accomplished the first impression. And that all that requires to make a nice first impression is a wave when you show your palms to say, I'm not a threat, a smile that is also non-threatening, and say your name clearly and confidently. Hi, my name is Rico. Nice to meet you. And just like that, you have made a first impression that the other person can feel more than likely calm and comfortable to be around you. That's all it takes. But in our minds, sometimes when we're meeting somebody new, we're meeting, maybe we're going for that job interview, and we feel like we have to come in with so much energy and make this huge impression, like the start to a movie that's nonstop action. We just got to come in there with so much. And the reality is that we don't. The reality is they may not really remember what we first say. But if we come in with that smile and showing our palms to say we're not threatening, just a wave or something along those lines, we've done well enough. Now, does that sound very intimidating? Probably not, right? We can all wave and smile and say our name clearly and confidently. And if that, try that, like literally try that. If you find yourself nervous in front of other people, even if you're giving a talk in front of somebody, if the first thing you do if you're giving a public discourse is to open your palms up, maybe you can open them up like this, right? Or even something like this, where you put them in more like they call it the steeple, and smile and then speak clearly on your first sentence or two. You will make a positive first impression. However, as we just discussed, that is not the lasting impression. And so when we go back to, again, what Chris Voss wrote in his book, Never Split the Difference, when we go back to what Andrew Bustamante had said, it's the lasting impression. The last impression is the lasting impression. And I'll give you an example of what I mean.
Hey guys, real quick, I am sure that all of us have had the moments where we're a little nervous or afraid to talk to somebody because we don't know how they're going to respond. Are we going to be able to talk to our life partner without them getting upset? Or are we going to talk to our boss to get that raise or that interview for that job? If we ever get nervous in those moments, we have to fearlessly communicate in a way that's effective to get the things we want and need. And if you want to know how to consistently do that, there's a formula and a program on exactly how to do that. And it's called the Be Fearless and Effective Communicators Program. If you are interested in learning more about that, you can click the link that's in the show notes, or you can go to attractiverelationships.com/fearless.
A couple of examples, really. Have you ever been on a first date and the initial impressions were like, wow, you are impressed? If you're a guy dating a girl, maybe she comes in and she's beautiful, she smells nice, she's articulate, she smiles and warm, and she's like, wow, this is a great start. Or maybe you're a woman, you date a guy and you're like, man, he really looks like he takes care of himself. He looks like he's a man of means. He seems very respectful and all the positive things, right? Great first impressions. But by the end of the date, something happens. They said something or did something. They were mean to the waiter. They were mean to the Uber driver. And all of a sudden, if that's like the last thing that happened, what do you think about that person then? Probably not the same way as the first impression. That just goes to show first impressions don't mean everything. So we while we do want to pay attention to those first impressions, we don't need to put all this weight into it. So again, here's a couple of examples, like real life examples. There was a guy that I had spoke to once where he was devastated. He had worked for a company for 13 years. He had relocated, like switched to a whole another location in the hopes that he would get extra training to get this promotion for. Again, he's been working for this company for 13 years and hadn't had a promotion yet, but he's good at what he does. And it turns out the boss said, we're not going to give you that promotion. We need somebody with more experience. Now, never mind for just a moment about the message that delivered to him and the effect that it had on him and for a lot of other people on the outside looking in. You can imagine this discussion with him wasn't the happiest. And so we shared he shared his thoughts, he shared a little bit of his feelings, and in turn we just had this conversation that was serious. And what I realized is that having that conversation was just making him not feel better, but worse. And so at the end of the conversation, to kind of lighten the mood, I said something kind of crass and stupid. I said, yeah, and the only thing that could make anyone feel better in this situation is to kick the other person in the nuts. And I said it with a smile, kind of jokingly. And he laughed out loud. Now, again, it's not funny in the way I'm telling it now, but if you were there, like in the context of how we were talking, it was funny and it lightened the mood a little bit. And he smiled and he laughed. And the next thing you know, we talked about lighter things for another minute or two. And then I said, hey, it's great talking with you. I'm gonna have to take off. I'll see you next time. And I left. That is a lasting impression that lasts. But why? Because it left him feeling more positive than he felt before I arrived. That makes a lasting impression. I'll give you another example. I was recently, today, in fact, I was talking with two women that are in a relationship, and we got into a discussion about relationships, the types of relationships. We talked about the LGBT community. We talked about current politics here in America, and a splash of religion. You can imagine how a conversation, even if you agree, can easily be a conversation that's just a gripe fest. We're going to complain about stuff. We want to show our stance, and certain feelings of anger and frustration or resentment is how we speak in those topics. And as I realized how the conversation started very light and jovial and became more serious, and then there's that kind of awkward lull where it's like, okay, well, this conversation's kind of run its course. Maybe we should leave and part our separate ways because it's that feel. But I know I don't ever want to leave people feeling anger or sad or worse than when we started talking. And so I just made a joke or I switched to something lighter. I think we started talking about comedians. We started talking about food and we spent a few more minutes talking about that. And then I was like, all right, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. And they're like, well, we appreciate you too. And then they left. And we all felt better about that exchange. So what I would highly suggest is that when if you are worried about making a great first impression on an interview or meeting people for the first time, really the focus is just be non-threatening. Let the other person be at ease with who you are and speak confidently, right? Because when you are showing up with a smile and showing your hands as like, I'm not a threat, maybe a wave, that is warmth. And when you introduce yourself confidently, my name is Rico. Pleasure to meet you. that shows competence. And that's something that I teach in my classes, that warmth and competence is what is charisma. That's how you display charisma. And you can do that instantly on how you approach and introduce yourself. But realize we don't have to put all this weight and pressure on us about how this first impression is going, nor do we have to put that weight and pressure on us throughout the middle of the conversation. The conversation will take its turns, and there's definitely some principles we can apply to that. But if you really want to make a lasting impression, make sure the conversation ends on a positive note, because how that conversation ends is the last impression that lasts with them, and vice versa. We've experienced it ourselves, and you can help other people feel better, leaving them better after talking with you than they did before. Can you think about that for a moment? So instead of ending the conversation in this awkward phase, maybe you guys had a disagreement. Maybe you guys were just complaining about, Bob, the boss, who is always demanding and doesn't know what he's doing. Maybe you were complaining about your respective romantic relationships and how things are terrible in the dating scene. Like, you can do all that, but at the end of that conversation, end with something positive. If you do that, we leave the other person better than we found them. And that's how you make the lasting impression. Try that out. And if you do try that out and it works for you, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how this is making me way more relatable and getting more of what I want, please let me know. You can message me. I love to hear such good news like that. And this is what I teach. And so if you want to know more in depth for you, how to be a fearless and effective communicator that's relatable, make sure to reach out and we'll see how we can help you. Have a great one, and I'll talk to you next time.
As we come to the end of another episode of Attractive Relationships, I want to express my gratitude to you for tuning in. Your support really does mean the world to me. Now, if this episode brought you any value, I would truly appreciate it if you shared this podcast with anyone that you think could benefit from our discussions on effective communication and relationship building. Until next time, remember, great relationships start with great communication. So stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep building those attractive relationships.